I'd like to welcome you to the Cuban American Student Association's Immigration Cuban Experiences panel. The Cuban American Student Association, also named CASA, was founded by students with social, cultural, and political objectives. Our main purpose is to spread awareness about the Cuban culture and experience. We strive to generate awareness among the community at large about the Cuban reality of living with the lack of basic human rights. Tonight we are here to share individual immigration experiences many Cubans face. Immigration stories showcase the adversity many people face in attempts of a better life and greater opportunity. Thus, we would like to thank our panelists for participating and sharing their immigration story with us. Please join us in welcoming our four panelists, María Maquetti, Alfredo Valdivia, David Piñero, y Lourdes Talavera. Would you please tell me in the audience what school you attend and what year you are, your major, and a fun fact about yourself.
So I start? Yeah. So hi, I'm Mary Marchetti, as our lovely presenter just said. And I go to Boston University. I'm a sophomore, and I'm a political science major. And a fun fact, and it actually relates to Cuba, I was born near the site where the missiles during the Cuban Missile Crisis were placed. So, I'm not a Russian spy, I promise, but that's, I guess, a fun fact about myself.
So hi, my name is Alfredo Valdivia, and I'm a junior at MIT. I'm majoring in chemistry, and I'm following the pre-med track. And a fun fact about me, I love the ocean, I love the water, I like boating, fishing.
Hi guys, I'm David Pinero. I was born in San Jose de las Lajas, Cuba. I'm currently at MIT studying computer science and focusing on security. And fun fact about myself. I usually use that I was born in Cuba. That's a fun fact, but I guess, right, so, yeah. I room with this guy at MIT. And actually, here it is. There are two other people at MIT who were born in the same, like my same hometown.
Wow.
So I'm Lourdes Talavera, or Lulu, it's easier. I'm a senior here at BC. I'm in nursing. Shout out to all the nurses. And my fun fact is that I'm half Dominican too. So I wasn't born in Cuba, but I'll be sharing my family stories.
Thank you. So the first question is, please describe your immigration experience.
Okay, so when my family immigrated to the United States, I was 4 months old, so I didn't remember that part, obviously. But we went first through Cancun, and then we went to Miami. And I'll talk on behalf of my parents and their experiences within Miami and kind of developing themselves within the States. So they did struggle a lot. We lived in Hialeah, Florida. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. For the first 5 years. Yeah. So, and it was actually at that time, I don't know how it is now, but the area where we were living, it was actually a pretty dangerous kind of area. So like sometimes in the night we would hear some shooting, or my parents would tell me that they would lock all the doors and windows just in case. And they each worked 2 jobs, and luckily we had a family friend who helped us make the transition. So, and we lived with them for a good 3 or 4 months, and then we lived in our own apartment. And from there, my mom, because my dad, he studied medicine in Cuba. He was a doctor in Cuba, and right now he's enrolling himself back into like the nursing program to become a nurse practitioner. But my mom, she went back to school here, and she's a registered nurse now. Yeah. So,
I love it.
So, and right now we did really well. We moved out of Hialeah. We're in West Kendall right now, and and so it's hard. It really is hard for any immigrant coming to the States. You're going somewhere new. It's a hard experience, but you just have to be determined and just really fight for what you want. We're really good right now.
So I was also born in Miami, Hialeah, and so I'll be talking about my parents. My parents both came from Cuba. My dad's story is more interesting, so I'll start off with that one. My dad came from Cuba when he was 16. He came on the Mariel boat lift. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Mariel boat lift. basically what ends up happening in 1980 is that in Cuba you have a lot of protesting going on. People are fed up with the government and starting to organize, and there's a need to have like some sort of pressure release fund. You have a lot of people that are against you in the country, and Fidel Castro needs to find a way to relieve that pressure by either jailing the people who are protesting or getting rid of them or allowing them to leave or anything. And so what ends up occurring is that a bus gets hijacked basically by like a few people who want to get into the Peruvian embassy, and they take this bus and they crash it into the gates of the Peruvian embassy. The Cuban guards who were like supposed to protect the embassy shoot at the bus, but if you have a guard here, the gate's here, and the bus is coming in this way. As they fired, they started firing at each other, and one of them actually died through friendly fire. And so then the Cuban government was asking the Peruvian government to send out the people who came to the embassy so that they could be tried. But the Peruvian government knew that those people would be executed if they did give them up, so they didn't. And in retaliation, Fidel Castro ordered the removal of all the protection that the embassy had. And so they removed all the doors and all the gates and everything that was in the way of anybody walking into the embassy. So then hundreds of people, actually I think it's thousands, a lot of people flooded the embassy. My dad found out about it through word of mouth, and he was a few blocks away, and so he just walked into the embassy. It was super packed. The small area, like basically like a courtyard, with like a building in the middle and some trees. And my dad ended up basically living in a mango tree for like 2 days because there was like no space on the ground. The idea being that you go into the embassy and then you ask for asylum, political asylum. And so then everybody was trying that. And he gets a ticket from the Red Cross was there, and so they show up and they give him a paper that says that the Cuban government cannot touch you, that you're protected by like the Red Cross, whatever that means. And so my dad felt really cool with that paper, and he had to, he leaves with like the idea that they're gonna follow up with the paperwork to see if he gets to leave the country. So he finally leaves the embassy, and then there's a group of protesters that basically chase him down the street. And he had this little paper that was supposed to protect him, but if you wouldn't have been able to run very fast, you would have gotten pretty hurt. And so then he goes back to his hometown of Santa Clara, and his father is also trying to coordinate to get out, so because the whole family wanted to leave, right? You want to just like leave, the 16-year-old was not going to just leave alone. They said it was like not the intention. And so they're in that process. There's a lot of paperwork that needs to be followed. They go to the police headquarters, and thousands of people all over the island are following this exact same procedure. The Cuban government initially didn't plan that people were gonna like get into that embassy, but they found an opportunity there to just say, you know what, like we're gonna take this so that all the enemies of the Cuban government can leave, and they branded it as getting rid of like Coria, like the garbage, the scum. And so then what they end up doing is they opened the prisons and they released political prisoners and they released criminals, they released bandits. They mixed everybody that was a problem to the government with the average criminal. And they give the image to the population that they're getting rid of all the garbage. But in reality, it has that strategy of getting rid of your enemies. And so then, after a while, a lot of people start like leaving, and they realize, well, we need to crank down. And they have this ingenious idea that if you manage to say that only one person per family can leave, then that person will go to their whatever country they end up in, most likely the U.S., work hard, and then have to send money back. When they send money back, they'll be paying taxes, and it's money that's coming from another country, and they'll be sending it to their family, right? And so then you guarantee this huge income. And so that was the strategy that they pursued. And then when my dad went with his family to try to get his visa to be able to leave the country, they told him that only one person per family can leave. And so then he had a little sister, so the idea was going to be like, oh, your little sister, the little sister will go, but she had a little baby, an infant. So it's like, oh, the little sister with the infant. And then the official said, no, either the little sister or the infant. And so then they said, well, she's not going to leave the infant on the island. She's not going to send the infant on a boat. So then the next in line was my dad. He was the next youngest. And so then he gets on a bus, and they take him to it's a concentration camp. My dad actually went to 2 concentration camps. Some of them were more military than others. They have different purposes. They're basically screens to see if you actually should be let out. For example, like if you have a good education, then they don't want you to leave as much as if you're a criminal. And so in those concentration camps, they have they have like security where they have like the big towers that they have with machine gun nests and the barbed wire and the dogs. And so when the food would come, they would have like a table where they put all the food, and then they would say to form one line. But of course, all the people, they would rush towards the food because there was not that much food. And the soldiers would say, formen una línea, like just make one line, and then two soldiers would stand on either side, would deploy their bayonets, and they'd just start marching along. And everybody fit into one line. Nobody ever didn't fit. And then at night, like at random times, they would call you and force you to stand in a line and do roll call. It was like, pretty terrifying ordeals. Meant to break people to see if they end up staying, Actually, I actually skipped the part. Before he got to this, before he got to the concentration camp, when he was going to go to that police station where they told him that he was the only one that can go, there was a military car that came to the house to pick him up, to take him to that police station, him and his family. And the government had set up committees in each neighborhood to protest against people who were leaving. And so then when the car came to my dad's house and everybody in the neighborhood saw that his family was leaving, they all started like protesting and chasing after them and throwing rocks, and they literally had to run away. Like his family had to like run away from even his own neighborhood. And my dad says a story, and he says it, very emotional, that he had a good group of friends, and there was an area where they were constructing, so they had like this big pile of rocks, and he got on top of a pile and started like throwing rocks at like the neighbors so that like his family could leave, and that his friends who were not leaving, who were actually going to stay behind, helped him out, and they stayed, holding back like the people that were trying to like get at my dad's family while my dad could leave, so he could leave, even though they were going to have to stay behind and deal with that. So that's like something that he says is very nice. Well, not nice, but it's nice that he had friends like that. So he ends up going through 2 concentration camps. At last, he makes it to El Mariel, the port. The Mariel is named after the city of Mariel, where they had a big port and the boats were leaving there. Basically, if you wanted to pick somebody up, from Miami or something, you rent a boat or you take your own boat, and then you just go to Cuba and you say, I'm here to pick up this family member. But when you get there, it's so disorganized that they say, no, you're not just picking that guy up, he's going to go on another boat. You're picking up all of these people, and they would overload people's boats. They would fill them up to the point where a lot of them ended up capsizing along the way. So he finally gets to the Mariel, he gets on a boat, he tries to pick like the nicest boat you can see, and they wait until at night, and they all like leave together at the same time. And he says that like after about an hour of, like even less than an hour, I think like 45 minutes of driving the boat, that he starts seeing like a light up ahead, and he was like, wait, is that Key West? Like, that doesn't make sense. It's been only 45 minutes. That can't possibly be it. And so then, having the paranoid mind that you're forced to have in Cuba, he's thinking, crap, these people just circled around, and their intention is just to group together all the people who wanted to leave, and who knows what they're going to do. They're going to incarcerate us, they're going to kill us, like, who knows what's going to happen. And what it actually ended up being, that light, was a Coast Guard ship from the U.S. with helicopters coming and everything. And these ships had a lot of dinghies, like balsas, that had like soldiers driving around, little tiny boats, inflatable boats, driving around looking for people who were drowning because their boats had capsized. They like talk about literally seeing like soldiers scooping up people with big nets and like pulling them out of the water as like their boats sunken. So he was lucky that he had a decent boat. And he says a story of like getting to Key West and like he's seeing the big water tower on the horizon and being like super happy and thinking that he's made it to like liberty and prosperity. And so then he has like this little bag of like toiletries that his dad had sewed for him. And he thinks, he's like, yeah, I don't need this, I'm gonna have everything. And he like throws it out, and then he says that was the stupidest thing he ever did because he spent like 2 weeks without brushing his teeth. But when they get to the port, he says that one of the most emotional moments of his life was that as he was going to get off the boat, a U.S. Marine gave him his hand and helped him out and gave him a jug of Coca-Cola because they were all dehydrated and they had low sugar and and so like to kind of like give him a little bit of energy, and that was like so nice to him because he had just come from a government that was oppressing its people and that wasn't giving them liberties and that was just trying to mess them up. You hear stories that when people try to leave, the helicopters will go and dump sandbags Or there is a 13 el remolcador 13 de marzo, which was a boat that tried to leave with like women and children and men and all kinds of people, that was sunk by the Coast Guard. There was 2 Coast Guard boats that started crashing into them and then shooting water hoses on the boat until they sunk, and a lot of people died. So you hear all those things, and then it's incredible to go to a country who doesn't know you, doesn't owe you anything, and that those people are there helping you out of the boat and giving you a home and saying, here you have your freedom. That's his story. My mom's is much less action. She ended up leaving in 1981. 1 year after that, they couldn't leave through the Maribel lift because of what was happening. The family decided that they didn't want to leave under those situations. And so then they ended up somehow getting a visa after a long time. They went through Costa Rica, and then they spent 6 months there, and then they went to Miami, and that's where they met.
So my story actually goes back to like my grandparents and the reason why they weren't able to leave. So it was in April 7th, 1961, they executed 2 of my family members for wanting free elections in Cuba. So at the time, like of course, like the whole family was like planning on like leaving, and everybody already had visas, just given what was happening. So my grandma was pregnant with my mom, and the government forced her to like watch the execution taking place, and my grandma went into a nervous breakdown and gave birth to my mom. So then she wasn't allowed to actually travel with the child. So she stayed behind while the majority of the family like left for the U.S. And then sort of like time went by so my grandparents also tried leaving in 1965 through Camarioca. But again, like for the fear of like the government coming and like dumping bags of sand on you while you were like leaving in a boat, they decided to scratch that. I actually remember seeing like their visas and like their paperwork and like passports for Camarioca. And then again through the Maribel lift, they were also afraid of like similar situation of like what had happened with the Teresa de Marzo in Havana. So they decided not to leave. And then my parents in 1970s filed for a secret U.S. visa lottery that was like drawn in September 2002, and by that time I was already born. And we were like, as soon as we got that, it was actually kind of like sketchy. The U.S. promised us like visas, and then you had to go like to the U.S. like interest section at the time, and going for like interviews and stuff. But then of course like once the people in your town found out that you were leaving, the government starts like hiring teachers and like kids and stuff to like come and like throw rocks and like rotten eggs at you and stuff, and they call you like worm gusano. So they did that a few times, and then towards the end we just had to like leave the town, and we like started jumping from like town to town for like around a week, and then we were able to like make it into the airport. So by the time that the Cuban government approved it, because you had to let the Cuban government know that you were leaving the country, so by the time that they approved it, they gave you like something called like la carta blanca, which is like a white card, telling you like, yeah, you can leave Cuba. Like that's when like all the protests and all that stuff started. So by that time that we got that card, we automatically went into like this famous like store in Cuba called like Gamos del Cerro, and we were able to get like the flights to leave Cuba, and then from that point on we were just like jumping from like town to town, and then we were able to make it into like the airport, and we were able to take a plane and get to Miami. So, and then of course from there onward comes like the immigration experience, but my grandparents weren't able to leave until 2005, which it was mainly through like our help, and I think like an emotional like aspect of it all is that my mom always promised my grandpa that he would take him out of Cuba. My grandpa had also like been to prison, he had been a political prisoner and everything, and then my mom always promised him, and then when he got to the U.S., like all that he would say is like, oh, you promised me, prometiste. So yeah, I think that's pretty much covers like my immigration story. Of course, there's a lot of like details and stuff, and I'm more than happy to take questions.
All of that just gave me chills. Alfredo did a wonderful job of explaining like the Marielito situation in the embassy of Peru, which actually my dad left through. And he describes it as my dad was like born into communism. He only went to 6th grade, and from there he had to go to the military by force or work and all that. So he was 20 years old, younger than me, and he was passing by the Embassy of Peru, and he saw this commotion, and he just decided to slip in without saying bye to his family, without packing anything, just like, right now, I'm leaving. And he describes it to me as he was there for 12 days with no food or water. He saw, like, I think they would eat from the trees and stuff, and he told me he would see like grown men like steal like breast milk from little children and them, because it was just like everyone wanted to leave, everyone was in this tight space, just hoping for something better. So when they finally all left, he made it to Miami. He describes the situation like, has everyone seen Scarface? Well, it's kind of like cliche, but he describes it as that. Like, my dad was homeless for 3 months in Miami, and everyone that he knew now is either dead or in prison. So it was just like a very, they left for freedom, and then they came to the United States, and they still, because of the whole Marielitos, like, people in Miami were like kind of discriminating against them because Fidel Castro sent out all the prisoners as well. So it was very hard to get a job. Like I said, he was homeless for 3 months. And that basically describes the immigration experience. I know we have more questions.
Thank you. What factors led to you or your family to make the decision to leave Cuba?
Okay, so I realized that you guys answered that partially of that over here. So I didn't talk about like the actual
Right.
transition outside of Cuba, so I'll just like mention that briefly and then get to the actual question. So we did the same thing, the lottery system, the bombo. So we, my parents applied for that, and they just basically said like, like, let's do it. What's there to lose? So they applied, thinking, maybe they're not gonna get it, but they get the notice that they do get it. So then they go through the interview, they get the Carta Blanca, and then that's how they, make the transition through Cancun to Miami. So, and another thing that I want to mention too is, and something about like, the Cuban government being very, very oppressive, is in the 1975 when the Angolan Civil War started, and the Cuban government decided to send volunteers to go and fight the war, or to help in, send doctors and professors and civilians to go and help reconstruct Angola or Ethiopia, which that they were in 1979. So the reason why I quote volunteers is because some people did go as volunteers. They wanted to be humanitarian, they wanted to do internationalist duty, and it's actually part of my research at what I'm doing now. But my dad mentioned this really interesting story that when he went as a volunteer, because he had to do the military service, so through there is where they make the selection to take people and send them off to Africa, or to, they even sent them, more civilians than military obviously, to Nicaragua, or just other parts of the world. And so he was in this huge, they were all in formation, all in lines, and he was assigned as a medical officer in his unit. And so they had the officials, of course, and he was part of one of those because he was the medic, and then they had the soldiers. So in those formations, you had the speaker, and the speaker said, you're all going as volunteers, you're all doing a great cause, you're helping the Angolan people, you don't have to go. So if you don't want to go, step outside of the line and we'll, just let you go. And as soon as like a couple of people stepped outside of the line, the guy just got angry, and he's like, get those names down, write down. We're going to do something like, basically saying that they're either going to arrest them or, just like scare the hell out of them, so they just jump back into the line. So that's why I say I quote volunteer, because a lot of people, many went as volunteers, but others went out of fear. But what was the original question again? I'm so sorry.
What factors led to you or your family to make the decision to leave Cuba?
Okay, so I answered that at the
actually, the whole Angolan situation has to do, later on when people go to Miami to El Mariel, and you see Scarface, you see all the crime that was going on, part of the reasoning for that was that in Angola you were paid, you know, how much were you paid a month? It was very small. It was like less than $30. And you had to go fight and kill people for a war that had nothing to do with it. They probably didn't even know where Angola was prior to that. And you go to Miami and you have these like drug dealers saying they'll give you like $10,000 if you kill this guy. And these people were like, oh yeah, of course. And so that contributed to that problem. Yeah. So I think the reasoning for my dad leaving Cuba started from his dad, and even before the revolution. Before Fidel Castro, there was Fulgencio Batista, who was also a dictator. And Cuba, under Fulgencio Batista, was not a democracy, and so there were a lot of people against the dictatorship. You know, you have a dictatorship, you want a democracy, go over to a dictator. Even though Cuba's economy was much better during Fulgencio Batista's dictatorship than it ever was during Castro's dictatorship. But still, people want a democracy, so they're going to fight for that. So a lot of people who were fighting the revolution were supporters of democracy. And there were a good percentage of people supported it. In fact, I think it's fair to say that most people supported the revolution when they took out Batista. Because Batista was pretty violent against the people, and he was pretty oppressive as well when he stepped out of line. And so the Cuban Revolution has to be kind of seen as like this betrayal, in the sense that Fidel Castro took advantage of this vacuum of power that would be forming from removing Batista. And he was a natural leader, but he hid a lot of his socialist and communist tendencies. And when he was interviewed, in fact, he spent his honeymoon in New York, you know, with his wife, and he would learn English, and he learned like 100 words a day while he was in New York. Very intelligent person, well educated. When he was imprisoned for trying to start a revolution, which failed, you know, he wrote a book similar to what Hitler did when he was in prison, and called La Historia Más Bará, and then he became a martyr. You know, he had been imprisoned, and then he came out, and he was against the government, the dictatorship, and then people rallied behind him. But he hid a lot of his socialist ideals and his communist ideals, and when asked, he was denied them. And so when he does get into power, and you don't hear any mention of of a democracy or elections or things like that, and his people who are of comparable status to him start disappearing or having accidents or being killed, like Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos, people start saying like, "Whoa, this is a traitor. This is not what we wanted." And so my dad was born in '63, which is 4 years after the revolution happened. So he spent his whole life under the system, but his father didn't. And so his father, who supported the revolution initially, then went against it. And so the reason that's important is that because once the dictatorship is there, they start limiting education, and they start saying that to the kids that are in school, it's like, hey, if your parents are teaching you something that's different from what we're saying, report that, because you need to learn the correct information. The reasoning being that if that would identify the people who are against the government and give a fear of parents informing their kids of real history, of what life could actually be like under a different system. But my dad's father, my grandfather, took that risk and educated my dad from a very young age about the realities of living outside of Cuba, the way that Cuba was before the dictatorship, before Castro's dictatorship. And my dad, when he went to school, he had to learn two sets of information. He would learn what he had to say in class, and then he'd also learn like what his dad told him that was a reality, and he had to keep those very distinct and make sure to not fall out of line, because he could get in trouble. And he did end up getting in trouble. He got in trouble a couple of times. One time, Fidel Castro was very young, and Fidel Castro was going to visit the U.S., and they said, "Oh, what do you think Fidel Castro will do when in order to visit the U.S. or when he does?" Like something along those lines. What do you think is going to happen? And my dad raises his hand innocently and jokingly and says, "Oh, he's going to take off his olive green uniform and put on a pair of jeans, because he's going to the U.S." And the teacher got offended and reported him. And then they made his parents travel like a huge distance, because he was like in Havana and they're from Santa Clara. And he got in big trouble for that, And then later on he got in trouble again because he was listening to Comandante David, which was a person broadcasting from Miami. He would say that he was broadcasting from the only free place in Cuba. And the Cuban government spent tons of resources trying to find this guy, and he was in Miami. Broadcasting from a van with an antenna. But it was illegal to listen to him, and he was listening to him in some kind of closet or something in the school, and he was caught. And so then they put this like state security agent like to be in charge of him, and they would interrogate him, and like typical
How
like
old is he at this point?
between 12 and 16. Definitely are younger than 16, more than 12. And so you take a kid like this and you put him in a dark room with a light ball on your face and saying like, who are you working for? Because they were convinced that he was actually like part of some kind of like little group or something, because he was listening to Comandante David, who was an anti-revolutionary. And they made his life a living hell. And so all of those things contributed to the idea of like, I don't know anything else and I don't have access to other information, but his father had instilled in him a sense that there was something better and that there is something superior to that system. And so that was his like motivation. And my mom's side is probably completely different, because her parents were always so focused on getting food on the table that, and they were also worried about that, like that fear of like what happens if you like start talking too much and your kids go and innocently say that, oh my dad said this, and then the parents get in trouble. So my mom actually like didn't know very much about what it was like to be outside of Cuba, and so she left mostly because her family was leaving and her parents were saying, hey, like they basically educated her in a very short amount of time right before they left. They're like, guess what, all of this is garbage and you have to go and you're leaving. And she was about to finish her nursing career, so she was pissed. When she came here, she didn't have anything because she didn't finish it. Yeah, so all of that, it's a lot of background, but it's all necessary to understand like why you would think that you should leave in the first place.
I mean, in my case, like I already mentioned like earlier today, like had two family members that were executed. They originally, it was actually like a small protest in the town itself, but of course like you have people that the Cuban government already from like early on started like hiring as like spies so that they could like determine like who is against the government in order to like take control of like the town. And it was like a small group of people, mainly others like that were from other towns as well. And what happened was that they get them, but they're like actually my family members were able to like leave the group, but then the group decided to like what's it called, like pretty much tell the police, like tell the cops that no, in fact, like Felix Hernandez like had been part of the group and Oscar Cruz as well. So then that's when they started like searching for like the family members and they get them before they're even like at the house. And for telling them that, they were like pardoned. And I mean, of course, like, and then after that, like the whole family dynamic just like fell apart, and everybody was trying to get out of Cuba, just in search of like, for political freedom and just being able to like speak your mind. And I guess I sort of always grew up with that mentality of like, yeah, my parents always educated me very well. I was also told in school many times, like, hey, if your parents are not teaching you, or telling you something, that goes against what we're teaching in class. Like, of course, right now, like, the way that I'm seeing it might not have been exactly the same way that they told me when I was like younger, because of course you're talking to like a 7, 8-year-old, but it was definitely something along those lines. And many a time I was able to just keep like the dichotomy of thought, like no, in fact, like they're telling me this because the system is like this way. My parents were always like really helpful when it came to like educating me, and my grandparents as well. Many times in school you would be told like, oh yeah, and like I remember this. I mentioned it to someone earlier. It's like as well, and they were like, oh yeah, they would tell you like, oh yeah, and this revolutionary flew into the distance and disappeared. And I questioned that a lot, and I questioned a lot of like the things that they would tell me. So I actually got like in trouble one time for questioning something the teacher said. But there weren't many consequences because my mom was friends with the teacher, so the teacher just didn't want to tell me to stay quiet. But and then my grandparents would tell me like, no, we like your grandma's brother was around that area when they shot the plane down. So he remembers seeing like when they shot a revolutionary down. So again, it's like that dichotomy of thought of like, okay, this is what they're telling me. This is what my family's telling me. Of course, I trusted more my family than I did, because I guess my family provided more evidence. Like, yeah, this is the reason why like you don't know a lot of your family members, and they're in the U.S. and So I guess I always just grew up with that mentality of like, yeah, we need to get out of here. We're going to get out of here like one day. Of course, my grandparents they did sort of lose hope towards the end because they were already like in their 70s and 80s, so they just never imagined like being able to leave Cuba. So, you know, and that must have been like very difficult, like growing in, like, you know, many times like if you weren't part of the Communist Party of Cuba, the only party, they would limit like the rations of food that you would get. They would limit, you know, so many things. So of course, like those are like other like factors that played in, and other reasons why, like, you know, my family just wanted to leave. And the idea of not being able to speak your mind freely, I think that was definitely something that I was always told since I was little. Like, oh, when you go to school, like, you know, you're only say these things, you know. And also, always like the mystery of like whenever we were taught like bad of the government or something, we always like closed down all the doors and we made everything like really dark. And again, when I was a child, of course, like those things like really did get to me. Like, yeah, we need to get out of here. So, yeah, I think those were some of the factors that led to my family's decision to try and leave Cuba.
Yeah, I think my dad describes it as always living in fear.
Right.
My dad's from a poor area in La Habana, which is the capital of Cuba, and he was born and raised into communism. And he, you know, like they used to give these books called libretas, which would tell you like how much food you could buy for the month, and it was never like plentiful.
Right. And I think that's actually an interesting point, how much food you could buy for the month.
Right.
It was in like they actually just like handed things out, right? And sorry for cutting.
No, please do.
But like, you know, even when it came, that's something that I guess is a big misconception, and that's one of like the questions like that's gonna come up later, but it's like nothing in Cuba is free. You know, like healthcare and like, you know, education. You go to a labor camp and you work in a labor camp in order to obtain these things, which you still have to pay for. Just maybe not as much. Right. Yeah, and thankfully I was able to like, we left. My brother was 14, and we left right before the like letters to take my brother to like military, like,
Yeah.
you know, school or whatever.
So what was like my dad's peak of like I'm done with this crap was he was forced into the military, and it was just absolutely absurd, like some of his stories, so much so that he pretended to be crazy to get out of, like he pretended to have a mental illness to get out of the military, which is pretty cool. But just the conditions, you know, like in every block there's like a house with like people who work for the government who kind of like spy on everyone. Yeah,
Comité de Defensa de la Revolución, which is like a committee for revolutionary defense.
right. And it's just like you see everyone else living in poverty, and then there's one house like with air conditioning, like toilet paper, and like a toilet that flushes, versus like the rest of the neighborhood is not like that. So I think mainly just, of course, for freedom and better life, which is what most immigrants come here for, the chance of a better life. But just to, you know, like imagine being right now your age, like 20 years old, and just picking up everything just because of the conditions you live in. Like imagine how bad they had to be to feel that way, to leave.
What was the most difficult part of your transition in the United States?
Okay, so I feel that I think I just talked a little bit about that, but I'll expand a little more on that. So, let's see. Well, definitely like our experience in Ohio, that was something very difficult for us. And I would say, because my dad, he has 6 siblings, and he reclaimed, I think that's the word for it, but reclaimed. He reclaimed 4 of his siblings, and most of the time, I don't know if you guys have probably heard these experiences, but sometimes when, I don't know if it's like something just different where we've been in this country for 20 years and then, or 15 years at the time, and someone comes, like a family member comes from Cuba, and they spent most of their time in Cuba, so like it's something different that when you live with them, you end up kind of fighting with each other, which, for la familia and all that. Cuba, everyone together. It was, it's beautiful. They all lived together. My parents, we come from the countryside, so I think in the city it's a little bit more, you could see more of the oppression, but in the countryside you could also tell that the system was not effective. Like my dad, he was in prison for 2 years because there was a cow roaming around that belonged to no one, and him and his friends, they went and got the cow, they killed it, cooked it because they were hungry. They had no food, no meat, nothing, nada. So, and they caught them, and my dad was in prison for 2 years just because of that. And they found out that the cow belonged to no one. They just roamed around by itself. So yeah, they, even in the countryside, they knew that it was difficult and that the system was not, it wasn't a good system. So, and I mentioned that, so I mentioned the problems with the family because I feel like that's a lot of, it's something that's been happening commonly with a lot of Cuban families in Miami, where they have someone coming from Cuba, and then they're like, ay, Dios mío, I can't deal with them anymore. They want everything already. They want a phone, they want a car, they want this. And it's like, listen, you have to make that slow transition. It's not just like that. Like, we're not going to expect you to live poorly. Like, you have all these opportunities given to you, but calm down a little bit. So, and I guess that's one of the hardest transitions that's happened recently with us, but it's been getting better. They're all talking again. They're all getting along again, and yeah, just for any immigrant experience, it's really just, you gotta have a mind for it. And yeah.
Yeah, I think the mentality that you come with as an immigrant is super important. I mean, and of course I was born here, so I'm just speaking completely from like my family stories. But also from what I observe, I do see, yes, that a lot of people who are coming in new or recently from Cuba, I think part of the problem is that in Cuba you get so used to having, you don't have almost anything, but then you can't really get that much. Like, hard work is not rewarded, so it's never incentivized. And so you live a life where you don't need to work that hard because it doesn't matter whether you do or you don't, you're not going to have much. Whereas here, you need to work hard in order to get something. You have the opportunity to get something. But a lot of the times people miss that. They see that they can get something, but they don't see that they have to work hard to get it. And so I think that's part of that expectation that people have. People who come to the United States from Cuba with the correct mentality that they have opportunities here and that if they work hard they will prosper, do very well. Miami was nothing until after the revolution. Well, Miami grew a lot more after the revolution when all the people who had the education to see what was going to happen, it took their businesses, their money, their everything, and then went to Miami in anticipation of what was going to happen in Cuba, and they built that up. So in my dad's case, when he came, he was lucky enough that he has an uncle who he had never met, but took him into the house, and he lives with that uncle from the day he got here until the day he got married. And so that was very nice. He didn't have, when he got to that house, they told him, hey, here you have food, you have clothing, and you have money for study materials. And he didn't really take advantage of the study materials very much because there's probably a bunch of reasons, but he felt that he just needed to start working and start contributing because he was just in this house living where they were giving him everything, and how was he just going to go to class and make them pay for his schooling and not be able to contribute in any form. So with that logic, which is the limited logic that he had, because he didn't have anything to actually see how much better life would have been in the long run if he had gone to school. His perspective was very limited. But he did a lot of basic work at lots of restaurants and waiting and all that. And then he started working at Ryder. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ryder. It's like a big trucking company. And he started there washing meat trucks at 3 in the morning. Nasty trucks, full of blood and all that, at 3 in the morning. And he saw that the mechanics had better, hours and better income and better, general life. And so he became a mechanic. He went to school to make tech and got his mechanics degree. And then from there he started working. And then opportunities opened up where his boss left after he had worked for a few years, and then some old guy gave him advice hey, you should really try to take that position, to move up, and he listened to him, and so he moved up, and now he is a general manager for a construction company. Like if you guys are from Miami, like I-75 is being constructed now. So like his company, he's in charge of the maintenance for the trucks and the equipment that gets used there. And so it's his difficulty in adjusting, I guess, would be in having everything be presented brand new. And now everything that he knew was a lie, or everything that he had seen before was a lie, it was all fake, and you see all these new opportunities and need to take them all in and then make the best choice. But he was lucky that he was able to be provided a house that was stable, because his uncle had been there before. My mom's family came all together, and so they had to work in different factories, and like my grandma says stories of how she would go work in the morning at a certain factory, and then go to lunch and meet up with this, like see this lady who was being paid like 5 cents more an hour, and then not return to that factory after lunch and just go to the new ones, which was going to pay her 5 cents more. And so they all had multiple jobs. They had a bunch of jobs. My mom took English classes that Mammy did. But she never like did her nursing degree or anything like that, because they were like always just busy working. Just like on the day-to-day, they didn't have that much time. They didn't have the opportunity to invest in like their education. And so, yeah, that's over time, over just pure hard work without any really specialized skills, they were able to make it, and like then eventually buy their own house and they do fine.
Yeah, and I think in my case, I think the most, I think I was trying to like think about like some of the most difficult things, and I think it all comes down to like stability. Like definitely like leaving everybody, like that huge transition of like you were so used to like the system. My parents also, you know, grew up like under the revolution, and I mean, so did I, and just having to come to the U.S., leaving everyone that you knew behind, leaving everything, like the house that you grew up in, and knowing that there's a good chance that you might not be able to come back to it. So like adjusting to that like idea, adjusting to like how many like different and the infinite possibilities that the U.S. like provided us with, that was definitely very difficult. And of course, like, you know, something that a lot of like Cubans tend to struggle with. My parents like came when they were in their 40s, so they had like zero like knowledge of English. So, and I mean, to this day, they still like struggle very, very much with it. And I think that's the reason why a lot of Cubans actually end up settling in like places like Miami, where it's like Spanish speaking. It's like their official language. And I mean, and that definitely limited them in terms of like what opportunities they could actually seek. They could, you know, they weren't able to like to study anything here. Instead, they started working in like factories and stuff to try to like become stable and adjust into the American like ways. Thankfully, my mom towards the end, by the end I mean like 4 years ago, she was able to like become a dental assistant. So that's what she's currently working in. My dad still goes from like factory to factory. And something else that was definitely very difficult is like, so I mean, we came in 2003, and by that time there has been like a large group of Cubans already in Miami, and of course like you start, you know, coming across like many different types of conflict, and one of them being like, of course, like you have a lot of people that did support like the Communist Party and did support, you know, all of the like horrific things that they saw in Cuba, and now you see them roaming around like the same, you know, area that you're roaming around in.
The neighbors that protested and chased
Right.
like my family members, a lot of them were in Miami.
Right, and I think that was definitely something that very difficult for my parents. Like seeing, so of course my mom doesn't remember, but my grandparents did, and seeing like people who were chanting, you know, paredon, which is like the wall, which was behind the people that they executed, like the wall that would stop the bullets, pretty much. Like people chanting that, like their neighbors and stuff, and you know, many people from the town. So seeing them just like walking around as if it's all good, and you know, that definitely was like a huge like conflict that my grandparents and my parents like, you know, had with people in Miami. Because now, of course, like my mom actually saw. So my mom probably went to like 3 or 4 concentration camps, and in the second one she was only like 16, and because my grandparents were very strict in regards to like, you are not joining the Communist Party, you're not doing this. So of course they would discriminate against those kids and against like those families. So they would just constantly just like send them away to like labor camps and like, seeing, I remember my mom, one of the things that shocked her the most was like, we went to a friend's house and we ended up seeing the lady that used to like punish them in like the school when she was young. So like that definitely got to my mom, and of course, you know, that's been a very difficult part of the transition. as well.
Before I answer, I just want to remind people that there's empanadas and coffee. Feel free to like get up and get some in there.
You're very good at it.
Yeah, same.
I think one thing my dad talks about a lot is, you know, coming to the U.S. Like I said, he was homeless for 3 months, but then having this guilt because he literally just picked up everything and left without saying bye or anything. He still had his whole family in Cuba. So this like feeling that, you know, to provide for himself but also for his family. So he would often work just to like have food for himself, but then like to send back to Cuba. So I think that was another big part. Let me just picture this. Difficult part of the transition. Like I said, when he first came to Miami, there was a lot of discrimination against Cubans. So to get a job was very difficult. He also worked construction, very weird hours. But even today now, I still see him like having difficulty transitioning. You know, in Cuba, it was kind of like you do what you can to survive, you know, so a lot of things are like you trade like behind the back type thing, so he doesn't understand that you don't have to do that here. Yeah, so, but overall, like, you know, like my dad didn't, he only went to 6th grade. He's been just, you know, working construction and stuff, but he's been able to foresee like the American dream in terms of like providing for his family in Cuba, even though they weren't able to come as well. I think that for him was his like American dream, even though I totally went off topic from the question.
So everyone mentioned this in their story, but what opportunities did you seek in the United States?
So, my parents, well, the first thing they thought was, you know, we're here with 2 kids, a 4-month-old baby, me, and my older brother, he was 5 years old at the time. So the first thing that occurred to their, you know, mind was, we need somewhere to live, we need food always on the table, we need money. So they took up a lot of factory jobs and just, you know, saved up money from there, and then some English classes, of course, because you need to get around. And luckily, and I think David mentioned this, but or you, one of you, sorry, that what helped them was, especially in Hialeah, there's a big Hispanic community, mostly Cuban, so you can get around with just speaking Spanish in the factories and such. But they still felt the need that, you know, they're not going to stay living there, you know, forever, so they're going to eventually move out, and now we're in West Kendall. So my mom took up, she went to Broward Community College and got her assistant nursing degree, and then of course moved up to registered nursing. And then my dad, he started his own business, his catering business, Paellas, the same Chef Manuel. So, and he's, you know, been pretty successful with that, and now he's looking more into, you know, starting a nursing program, and, you know, joining my mom in on that too, so to make like more revenue. And so, and that's like how Lucas mentioned, it really is an American dream that you can move up, you know, even if it's just little steps by steps, you can still, you know, if you have a plan and you go with it, then you do it. You do it with two little kids that you need to care for, so, and they did it. And here I am.
Yeah, I think upward mobility is one of those things that's just like so crucial in this country. That like there are incentives to work hard, and there are incentives to go up the ladder. And if you are intelligent and hardworking, you will tend to find a way. And I answered what both my parents did in terms of like opportunities they took here. But I think that like another way I can answer the same question is that like one of the motivators for at least when I was a little kid, my dad would tell me that like one of the motivators for why he left the country was so that his kids could be born in freedom, like so they could have like the reason they were born. And so like then that's definitely an opportunity that he followed through with. When I was born, they gave me they didn't know anything about the education system here, but they always give me like the basic values, the ideas that hard work pays off, the idea of like, hey, when we were gonna to change the car oil, he would take me outside and make me get dirty and watch him. And my dad has a lot of back problems, and so I would see him like actually be in pain from like his job or what his job was. And he would tell me, estudia para que no tengas que hacer lo que yo estoy haciendo. Like study so you don't have to do what I do. And it's a very basic way of motivating somebody to work hard, especially if you don't know like, hey, go to these top schools or take your SATs and all of those things. But those principles gave me the initiative to be able to find those things out on my own and to search for opportunities by myself. And then they always fostered like a sense of communication in me. And he followed the same thing that his dad followed, which was like complete openness and honesty and discussion of like the hardest things in life and the best things in life without any censorship, you know. And so, like that's a weird way to answer the question, but it is like something that he was able to make the best out of. You know, he was in a tough situation, both my parents in very tough situations, and they definitely made the best out of it. But the hard thing about immigration is that you kind of sacrifice, your generation sacrifices pretty much everything for the next generation. Like your parents worked very hard, my parents worked very hard, and your parents worked very hard, and there's not that much upward mobility for them compared to the upward mobility that we can have, and the opportunities that we can have by just being born here and being able to go to a school and get a good education. So, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, definitely like, just like seeing my parents like struggle with like, you know, the language and just like a lot of other things, and something that my parents always say is like, oh, had we come younger, we would have done this, and we would have been able to like study, and we would have, and then I also remember in Cuba, one time after like school or whatever, I went over to my grandparents' house, and my grandpa, who like, you know, used to read a lot, and like, you know, even though a lot of the books that he read, we weren't allowed to read in Cuba. I found this out like not too long ago. And like the one thing that he did tell me was, you know, the only thing that the government or anyone cannot take away from you is your education, or your values and, you know, your ethics and your morals. And I remember like that stuck to me a lot, because the reality was that, yeah, everything that I learned in Cuba, everything that I learned like anywhere, no one was really going to be able to take away from me. No one was going to be able to take it away from me. And then when I got to the U.S., I sort of like, you know, continued with that mentality of like, yeah, I can learn as much as I want. I can continue like learning, and then I started realizing, of course, like, you know, my parents were working very hard and stuff, and I did get a lot of guidance from even family members and like school teachers and friends that I picked up on the way of like, hey, yeah, if you continue studying, you can like, you know, make it places, and you can, you know, this and again. And then of course I would, you know, relay those messages and those ideas back to my parents, and they would completely agree. It's like, yeah, had we come around here, we would have been able to do this and, you know, do that. And, you know, it's such a shame that we came, you know, when we were so much older. So in terms of opportunities, I want to say like definitely education is one of the ones that I've like seeked like the most.
I hate to be like redundant, but also education. My dad always tells me, which like kind of gets me mad the way he says it. He always says like that he was a poor, like uneducated man, and look how far he's made it in terms that he has a daughter like going to BC, like studying nursing. Like to him, that is like everything has come full circle for him. I won't like be as eloquent and beautiful as they are.
So how has your view on the American dream changed, if at all?
I mean, as you know, just mentioned earlier, it really hasn't. I still think that you can, you know, of course, the United States is not perfect. There's no country that's perfect, but you can still. I know it sounds corny, but you can follow your dreams and, you know, achieve them. So yeah, I don't think for me it's really changed much. I mean, you guys are sure.
Yeah, I don't know that I can like answer that super well from my dad's point of view, because I don't think I've actually asked him that very much. I do hear often like people who come from Cuba and have come here and worked very hard, that they say that one of the things that's unfortunate about this country is that you have to spend so much of your time actually working super hard, and you know, in order to just be able to move up a little bit. And like the generation that comes here has to work so much harder than the next generation that's born here, that I think that that's a little bit of a disillusionment, but they see that it's a sacrifice for the next generation. So it all comes back to the idea that I think is what you're trying to say, is that the initial generation that is the immigrants live through their offspring because they're the ones that are like the American dream. Like they have the American dream in front of them. I think the people who immigrate don't have it that much because they start at a huge disadvantage. They do. You can early enough where you took total advantage of it. But the next generation really does have like the full American dream. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to like, because from my understanding, like American dream really implies like, oh yeah, you're able to like buy your house and you're able to have like a stable like life and nice retirement or whatever. And I think in a way, my view, I guess, or my experiences have sort of redefined the American dream to just be like, that Mary mentioned, which is just like, hey, like, the world is your oyster. Like, there's so many things you can do. There's so many opportunities you can take advantage of. Like, I don't know.
I think for this one, I'm going to answer it from my perspective versus what I think my dad's perspective would be. Because I grew up in Miami, which is like, everyone's Cuban, we speak Spanish and Spanglish. But coming to a place like Boston, it's really transformed my idea of like the American dream, because I've been exposed to different types of immigrants and different immigration stories. And I think being in a place where everyone's so similar, like Miami, like it seems a little bit easier for me, the American dream. But I think for the rest of the United States, it's not so much, like hard work is definitely part of the equation, but sometimes there's so many other factors like discrimination. So that's something that I've been thinking about just, as I'm finishing my time here at BC. But I think American dream is like a misconception because like, you can't be dreaming, you have to be working, you know what I mean?
Wow, nice.
Oh,
Nice.
I do want to point out one difference between Cuba and the United States in terms of opportunities. In Cuba, you can only be so much. You can only be like what? You can be a doctor, you can be a professor, you can be a...
Whatever the government tells you.
Whatever the government tells you.
You
Yeah,
get a
you get a
sign.
sign. Like for my dad, when he went to college, he had to pick 3 of his top careers that he wanted. Doctor, what was it? I think it was professor and architect, and he really liked architecture and everything. And they gave him the doctor one. He said, this is what you have to do. He's like, oh, okay, that's my second choice, I'll do it. And it worked out for him, but so that's like, that's how you could see the difference between both systems and how I do agree that like this country, there is discrimination against immigrants and everything. But in terms of opportunities, and I think David was talking more about the opportunities, well, we all were, but so in terms of opportunities, the U.S. has definitely more than.
Yeah, and I think actually, like now that you mentioned that, that is definitely something that something I forgot to bring up. That, like, yeah, in Cuba, you're told by the government what you have to be. It's not like you can just like choose how we have the ability to choose, where we are today, and what we want to pursue in life. Like for example, my dad actually, he was apparently really, really good at math, and he was like one of those kids in town. And the government came to him and he did ask, because it was during that Cold War period, and told him that they were going to send him to the Soviet Union. Of course, my dad and his parents were also like anti-communist, so they spoke out against it, and my dad also spoke out against it. And they just told him like, hey, then we're going to make sure that you never find a good job, a job that you find fulfilling in your life, or at least while he was in Cuba. And they did. They forced him. Well, they pushed him and they forced him to be a PE teacher. When he really did not want to. So instead, of course, you have to be working on in the black market, like trading goods and stuff to make a living and to survive. So.
What are some misconceptions that you feel people have about immigrants?
So, well, I'll tell you one little story that happened to me here in Boston actually, and I was really caught by surprise. But there was this one man on the bus that he asked me like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, oh, I'm from Miami. And he's like, it's a beautiful city, but the people there are stupid. And I'm like, dude, that's the most offensive thing you can tell someone. I'm from there, you're calling me stupid? So, and I think that that's the common misconception that there are, like, oh, they come from another country, you know, they don't speak English, they don't, you know, they don't know the system here, and of course they don't know the system, they come from a different country, so, and I think that that's something that, and it's really just a question of ignorance, like some, and unfortunately there are a lot of people that, you know, they kind of think that way, that, oh, immigrants, you know, this is not their country, they shouldn't be here, you know, they're not gonna do anything, they're just gonna, you know, go and work in factories or fields or anything, and they're not really given that opportunity or that kind of venue to go and, you know, sometimes they're not aware of the opportunity, so they just work most of their time here in the United States in like a field or something, and that's, so I guess it's like part of the misconceptions, and they're just not, you know, they're not given that opportunity, and that's something that the United States government has to work in, and me as a political scientist, I'm going to try to help. So, yeah.
I'm not very sure how to answer the question because I don't really feel that I have been particularly the subject of like any, well, I guess like I've been to South Carolina, and sometimes in South Carolina they'll give you a dirty look if you look Hispanic. But, you know, I think I can answer the question from a more general perspective. When a country goes under in terms of like having a dictatorship or swinging all the way to the left or something like that, there's a huge brain drain that happens that could be taken advantage of, you know, and I think that that's a huge missed opportunity for any country that doesn't notice that or use it, because you know, when the revolution happened in Cuba and people saw it coming and they took all their money and all their intelligence and all their capacities to the U.S. to South Florida flourished. And when in Venezuela, Chavez took power and everybody took their oil money and all of their knowledge to Doral, you know, and I think that that's super important. I mean, and I think that's something that we see like throughout all of history, right? In World War II, the persecuted Jews that went to other countries and were very useful in working against the taking down Germany. Yeah, Einstein, right? That's like the perfect example. So I don't know if that's a misconception, but if it's something that people haven't thought about, I think they should. If you think of a typical immigrant as like a farm worker, then you're missing out on like the whole continuum of people that exist in every single country. And any one of those people from the top to the bottom could be an immigrant that goes to another country for whatever reason.
Right, I mean, honestly, that's exactly what I was going to, you know, mention, the idea that it's like, yeah, I mean, not all, I don't know, I guess it's just the idea, right, that people just have like that notion that it's like, yes, like everyone who is an immigrant like works like in the fields or works like, you know, in factories, and well, there is some truth to that.
Yeah,
you know,
you have to be there before you get.
Of course, you know, and you really have to start somewhere. I mean, you come into a country that has like absolutely nothing. So I think the misconceptions just mainly lie like due to like ignorance and like people not really like, you know, taking the extra step to like see exactly why some things are happening. Yeah, and aside from that, of course, like now with like, you know, the GOP debates and Donald Trump mentioning these things, of course, like, you know, people are gonna take it to heart and stuff. But and again, the underlying reason why they do is because they just aren't aware of like stories like, you know, like the ones that you guys are mentioning as well. That it's like, yeah, I mean, you come to this country and you work hard and like, you know, hey, like your kids are gonna be going to like, you know, amazing schools and are gonna be, you know, helping the country, the United States, like, you know, be in a better position than it was, you know, 5 years ago. And I think that's, I guess what I'm trying to point out is like the light in which immigration is viewed, right? And I think mainly recently it's been viewed like in a negative light, whereas, you know, there are so many like opportunities, like the brain drain, and so many things that immigrants can actually help the U.S. with. So.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out really quick that like what you guys are doing and coming to actually an event like this, where the whole point is to like discuss this topic, is very like nice of you guys and mature,
right.
And avoids exactly the result of this
perpetuating that same mentality and that same ideology.
I think I'll just end it with, oftentimes like when we think of immigrants, we think about like what they are here, without really considering like why they picked up everything and left. Whether that be Cuba, Dominican Republic, anyone want to shout out where they're from? No? Okay. What? Paraguay, perfect. So I just think always putting yourself in other people's shoes is important. I know it's not a misconception, but I'm just like.
Remember, I mean, it definitely helps, like, you know, like what I was mentioning, but it's like, yeah, I mean, it's just based off, like, ignorance, the fact that, that people are not willing to, you know, to step into their shoes and realize, like, hey, why did they leave? Like, oh my God, like, they went through these things, like, of course they wanted to leave, like, yeah, of course, come in, like, and I think that is an important factor.
So we're going to take this time to open the floor for some questions. Any questions?
My name is Gabe. I'm treasurer of CASA. I just wanted to know how you guys felt about, and feel free not to answer, a possible end to the Cuban Readjustment Act, also known as wet foot, dry foot.
So if the question is specific, I don't think the question is just like, okay, I can't answer the question just starting from the wet foot, dry foot. I think that question goes back to like the whole idea of like just in general opening relations and everything with Cuba. And I think that everything has its pros and its cons. The reason why the wet foot, dry foot policy was instated was because the people coming from Cuba were political refugees. That's how I understand it. And that's why if like a Haitian boat comes next to a Cuban boat and they both land on the beach and the officials are there, they will take the Haitians back to Haiti and the Cubans can stay. And that's because the Haitians migrate for economic reasons and it's assumed that the Cubans are migrating for political reasons. Now, if the argument for removing the Cuban Adjustment Act is that, well, the people who are migrating are not migrating for political reasons anymore and it's just economic, then in that sense, then that would be okay. But I don't think that that's actually the case. I think that there's an issue that is very sensitive with like opening up trade with Cuba, which is legitimizing the Cuban government. It's not a democracy and it doesn't respect human rights. And so there is that same sense of like people who leave are leaving because they're like oppressed, but they also are leaving because of the economy because they can't find food. So it's a very delicate balance. But I think that it's dangerous for people to say that we should end the Readjustment Act because people are not leaving for political purposes because look, we're doing business with Cuba, like we're doing business with China, and China's a dictatorship as well. And so then it gets very sketchy. I personally, I think that in general, anybody who leaves for political purposes should be allowed to have refuge because I don't think that it's okay to have somebody who's being persecuted by the government for their beliefs and then just like hang them out to dry or return them to the same country where you know that that person can be imprisoned or executed.
Oh, I have a question, sorry. No, go ahead. But then how do we define political purposes? Because just by thinking of like the rest of Latin America, like there's so many corrupt governments. Like, well, how are we defining political refugees?
Right. I mean, if you like went to a protest for the ladies in white who are the biggest dissident group and the government beats the crap out of you and they remove your job and they say that you can't work wherever you work anymore and they start removing your kids from school and they start like really cramping down on your on your like privileges, on your liberties, on everything that you have, then in that sense, then I guess you would be a political refugee. If you leave because you were a supporter of the Cuban government until it wasn't convenient for you anymore, and then you realize, oh crap, like I probably made the wrong choice by screaming paredon, and then now I'm going to leave because I want to make money in Miami, then you're an economic migrant, and like, well, I don't see those people in a positive light at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to get at, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like the idea that it's like, well, I mean, given that you do have like other countries that are undergoing also like political oppressions, why is it that Cubans, have like this like whereas the rest of Latin America doesn't? And I think that's a very fair like question to like put out. And I think it really comes down to like again like oh yeah, the distinguishing between like two individuals, like one who comes for political like purposes and the other who doesn't. But like how can you make that distinction? And I think like two possible solutions is like one to just like remove the whole thing altogether for Cubans, which I think would make it more fair for the rest of Latin America, or like open it up for other countries in Latin America or countries around the world who are going through the same thing. So yeah, it's just like a really large.
I just have two things to say about that. One, like the Cuban Readjustment Act, it is defined for political refugees and such, but it was actually a result of that U.S.-Cuban tension. So in a way, I forgot what the event was. I don't know if you guys remember it, but there was a moment in time where I think Bill Clinton, he put the law into effect, right? That he did it in a way to kind of punish the government. I don't know. It was some political, like it was on a top government political level of why they put the act, and then of course like they covered it up and disguised it nicely as saying no, it's for the political refugees. So that's just, I guess you guys can talk more about it if you want.
Well, that's a very interesting story to do.
Yeah, and then the second point, I don't know if you guys heard about the 40-something thousand Cubans that are in Costa Rica coming up through Central America. That's a big problem coming up, especially for, don't get me wrong, I want them to, have the same opportunities that we do here in the States, but it's gonna, Miami's actually like really scared of when, like those 40,000, because they want to go to Miami, like most of them want to go there. So, and that's gonna be kind of a complicated issue, and I'd like to see how that develops. And I want them to, be happy and get the opportunity, but how will, cities like Miami handle that? So, Lucas, I don't know if you wanted to comment back on that.
No, I was just gonna ask, like, what makes, I guess you're thinking logistics, right? Like,
Yeah.
in terms of space and whatnot. But I was just gonna, what? Right, I guess, okay. I was just gonna ask, like, what makes this massive immigration different than, like, our family's massive immigration?
I mean,
Because in reality, it's not.
no, it's
right?
not different. And in fact, if you look at like the Cuban Revolution's lifespan, about every 10 years there is some kind of massive exodus, pressure release valve where they get rid of people, like they just turn the other way and allow people to leave.
Exactly, in our families,
It's
they've
necessary.
been coming, let's say, in a course of 10 years, there's, let's say, 300 coming a month, But this is actually 40,000 coming on at once. So that's what they're worried about.
Yeah, the Maribel lift was 120-something thousand
So, yeah. So,
over the span of like about a year.
yeah, so that's like another massive occasion coming up. So it'd be interesting to keep an eye out on.
Right, and of course, like the Cuban government still has like some spies among all of us.
Yeah.
So,
Keep up for those.
it's also something else to like, I mean, it's definitely like a very like tricky situation. There isn't any movie you can make without making someone upset, right? And I think that's why, like it's definitely something that needs to be thought about very carefully.
For the greater good.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of like logistics, in terms of like, morality and like ethical,
yeah, I'd also like to point out how great this is for the Cuban government, because all of these people are going to come here and bust their butts and work and then send their wages over to their family who's starving and then pay huge taxes on that. And it's just a source of income that's been supporting the Cuban government for a huge amount of time.
The Cuban government wants it to
It's
happen.
so intelligent, it's so messed up, but
Yeah.
it's really intelligent.
I bet they actually like sent them out, like it was a negotiation and probably, pay you this much, go, leave. So, I think you had a question.
Yeah, tell me if I'm wrong, but was the wet foot, dry foot implemented because of the Bay of Pigs to like kind of form like a peace with Cuba?
Is the Western Trucking, I'm not actually
Sure,
sure, is that part of the readjustment act, or is that after the readjustment act?
I think it was after.
After the readjustment act?
Yeah.
Like was it to make up for the Bay of Pigs?
I'm not sure, because I mean, the Bay of Pigs happened in 1960.
61, I think? 61,
Yeah.
So,
and then
it
this
was in the 1990s.
And I think maybe the reasoning for it is that it's like, how do you decide if, okay, thousands of people get on boats and try to make it to Miami. A lot of them drown in the process. And actually, that's one of the problems that we have in Cuba, I think, is that people prefer to drown in trying to get to the U.S. instead of trying to pick up a rifle and fighting against the government. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's, it's, and my dad did it. All of us, like, have family members that did that as well, trying to find liberty. But then how do you define, how do you define who gets to stay and who gets to go? How did you make it to the U.S. or did you not? Like, if you're within 12 miles of the land, then you're still in that territory. So do you say that everybody who made it within 12 miles that gets to stay. And so I don't know, I'm not exactly sure, I can't speak with authority about that, but I would assume that it was just because there needed to be some kind of concrete way of saying who gets to stay and who gets to go.
And I think, and here's something else, just like my sort of like grain of salt, like personal view, like when it comes to like, even like the Cuban Adjustment Act, is the idea that it's like, well, that's a very, so the reason why in Cuba there probably hasn't, like another revolution hasn't surfaced like after 1959, has been because of these like pressure releases that the government has done. So maybe like a way to keep the pressure in and have the people actually like come up to the streets and request like an actual change might be to like have them stay on the island and removing the Cuban Adjustment Act. That way the people have like they're faced with like absolutely zero options of like leaving. Instead they just have to focus on like their views and like that they actually need to change like the system in Cuba. But of course it's super risky. That was just like
If you consider things that could possibly start a revolution in Cuba, it's all the opposite of what we've been doing. Because part of it you can consider, like in theory, let's say like that you were able to actually impose like an embargo. There's an embargo technically, but like it doesn't do anything. But if you were actually able to like surround Cuba like theoretically with like boats or something, and make sure nothing got out or got in, I doubt that that system would last very long because people would either die of hunger or fight back. And so that's obviously not a very humanitarian way of going about it. It's not even feasible. But the idea still stands, and I think that part of the perpetuation of the problem is that people are so dependent on support from others, like coming from Miami and outside the country, that are sending money in, that it actually keeps the people subsisting at a high enough level where they can deal with it. And they don't need to start a revolution because they're getting along just fine. And the same thing happens like with the little bits of changes to personal liberties. They'll make reforms small enough that they can keep control over the consequences, but they do the reforms just in time before you say that you can't handle it, you can't deal with it. For example, internet access is something that they're expanding very slowly in a very controlled manner. They have at first internet cafes, and then they start expanding like Wi-Fi networks in like different little parks, and they see what effect that has, and they cut down the Wi-Fi and they shut it down for a couple of days, and they say how they have technical problems to observe how the population reacts to not having that connectivity anymore. And then little by little they start making those reforms. So basically everything that we've been doing up to now,
just sort of like adding an adjective which has been used, like heavily censored internet.
Oh yeah,
Sure. There is no way that you can actually access information like in Cuba about what's happening outside of the world, right? And that's mainly the reason why like people use things such as flash drives in order to create like an artificial like network where it's like somebody goes into like the U.S. and just like downloads a bunch of information into a flash drive, just like screenshots of like pages of like Google and stuff, and then that's what they take back. And then that spreads around. You give me your flash drive, I have a computer, I can stuff it in with all the information that I brought from the U.S. And then you copy it, again, and then that's how information like spreads about what's actually happening outside of Cuba.
Although that has its benefits, but it also satisfies your need for
Right,
information
exactly, right.
and prevents you from going out onto the street and protesting for free internet because
Right.
you're already getting your internet.
Right.
But guess what? Somebody's deciding what they want to put on that flash drive and what they're sending you. So
Right.
it's very censored even in that sense.
And
They're
did
not
you
sending
know?
political information.
And did you know there's no crime in Cuba? They don't talk about anything bad that happens in Cuba. Oh,
Right.
the Cuban government's the best. Just
Yeah.
nothing's wrong with
And
them.
then just jumping on that like boat. It's the idea that like everything, like a lot of statistics and everything that you see online about Cuba is like is positive. And why is it positive? Because the government is the one that's conducting these surveys in Cuba. So it's very hard to mark no when the only answer is yes.
Yeah.
They don't allow human rights organizations on the island to conduct their own research.
Right. So of course there aren't like literal political prisoners in Cuba.
And no transmission of HIV from mother to child.
Because they have, concentration camps for people with AIDS in Cuba. And then of course, and the people are very afraid to speak up even here for, because you don't know what could happen to your family in Cuba. Again, it's like I briefly mentioned this earlier, but the idea of spies. Like, there are a lot of spies in the U.S. that are actually working for the Cuban government. Of course, there you have a lot of paranoia and people, which shouldn't happen. Coming from Cuba and being able to speak speak up, but that's the reason why a lot of people don't hear these stories. Of course, in Miami, they're very common because everybody, you know,
And
it's
actually,
them, but
Cuban
people are,
poli- yeah. Oh,
people are afraid of speaking up. People
Yeah.
are afraid of, like, you know, because you don't know what could happen to your family back in Cuba.
And a Cuban political activist 30 years ago here with his wife, and they escaped Cuba because they were political prisoners, and they started to, you know, they start an organization here. So the couple, they were in a mysterious car crash. The husband was killed, and the wife was paralyzed for life. And they found out that it was a Cuban government agent who had done the
Right, and that's very common. Like in
in
Cuba,
Miami.
they value intelligence very, very much. They value being able to, like, you know, control, like, people, and, you know, in a way they're controlling the people that have even left Cuba.
The wife told my dad the story, so I'm saying it's natural.
There have been people who have gotten killed leaving a news agency after giving some interview where they said something against the Cuban government, like some prominent official leaving a station and then getting like attacked.
Yeah, like also the Soviet Union's like largest base called Lourdes in Cuba, very near Havana. You know, again, was just the Soviet Union's largest intelligence agency, and they recently opened it again. So you know, intelligence is a very like important issue in Cuba.
I have a question. So we're talking a lot about negative things in Cuba. I want to know what's your favorite part of your Cuban identity? What's your favorite part of being Cuban?
I love it, especially, well, in Miami too, but here in Boston since, well, at BU, I only know one other Cuban, so I'm so happy that you guys have like a Cuban organization that I could, you know, come to here. I'm glad to see you all. Thanks for coming. And so I love it, like I'm proud of it. Like most of the time, I love saying I'm Cuban American because I have my American citizenship too. But I just, you know, when they ask me where I'm from, and I'm supposed to say like I'm from Miami because I was raised there, I just say, oh, I'm Cuban. Like it's me, it's a part of me. I find it really special, you know, honestly. And even though the government's messed up and they're horrible, they almost withhold, because I'm going to Cuba next week actually, for spring break, yeah. So, and I'm going
That's a
to like,
whole other discussion, which we all have right now.
But, and I'm going under an educational license because of Boston University group that we're going to take.
Oh, is it the journalism class?
No, it's African American Studies.
Oh, okay.
One of the professor that I work with, she's organizing the group. And so we're going next week, and I almost got screwed over with my passport because I need both my U.S. passport and my Cuban passport. And it was supposed to, we ordered it in October. It was supposed to come in January, and it came in yesterday. So, and they almost withheld it because since President Obama's going next month, they're trying to limit the number of Cuban Americans going into Cuba just in case there's any protests that could break out. So I was really worried about that, but I ended up getting that resolved. But yeah, just in general, you know, be proud of your heritage, be proud of where you're from, whether you're from Cuba, Paraguay, you know, Dominican Republic, anywhere. You know, so just be proud of it. It's a really special part of you, and I'm proud of Cuba.
Have you been back?
Actually, last time I went was 7 years ago, 2009. Yeah, so this is gonna be my 6th time I go because I still have family over there. So, but I'm going to the capital, so I'm going to Havana, and my family's like 30 miles south, like of Havana, like still, you know, I don't know if you guys know Afghanistan.
Oh, okay.
Akisan. You know
Yeah.
Akisan? You know Akisan?
Yeah.
No, it's like this really small village, but
Right, yeah.
but that's where we're from, and I was born in San Antonio de los Baños, which is where the missiles were placed. You guys?
So in my case, like I was born here. Families have like all Cuban blood, so I do also consider myself that I'm like Cuban. What aspects of that am I the most proud of? The music and the food is awesome. Yeah. Also, if you think about it, like the idea itself of like you being tied down to a geographic area because of like your family was born in that is kind of like, yeah, it doesn't make that much sense. But it is important for every individual to have some sense of identity that they fall back on. And I think that coming to college has actually grown more attached to my Cuban identity because it's like everything changed, but what do I know for sure? That I'm Cuban and that I like have these customs, and that's something you can fall back on. And also, that's something I was actually thinking about. I think we talked about this like a while back ago. Like, why do I like to talk about this, and like why Cuba specifically? Like, I think that human rights are important for any country, but like I devote most of my service time or whatever to the Cuban aspect. and it's because I know the most about it, but like it pisses me off in such a fundamental way. Like to me, the flag, you know, I thought, because I have a flag in my room, and then I had to think, should I have this flag in my room? Because this is a flag of this dictatorship that's like standing for everything that I'm against. But I don't see it as that's what the flag represents. I see the flag as representing the suffering of 11 million people who shouldn't be suffering that way, and like, and to me it reminds me of the fight for human rights that needs to happen and for democracy that needs to happen, and also the history behind Cuba before it was under this dictatorship. You know, all the great things that Cuba had before that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like something that I'm really proud of. Like my Cuban identity is exactly that, right? Like, just like the history that, like, you know, that my grandparents told me about, like their great grandparents, like when they migrated to Cuba from like different parts of Europe and stuff. And I think like, you know, there's a certain like magic to it as well. And then something that Alfredo mentioned earlier, which we did discuss it before, I think it's super strange that we're so tied down to like this geographical like area of the world where you're just like, yeah, this is where, like, you know, but there, like, what I was saying is that there is some sort of magic to it, like the idea that it's like, yeah, my grandparents grew up in that house, like my grandparents' parents grew up in that house, like that's where my parents were born, that's where I was born. So it's weird. It's weird.
I mean, I think it's a psychological necessity to have some kind of identity,
Right.
And then that's just like the best way to put it.
Yeah, and then besides that, like I am very happy of being able to share stories with like many people that, and I think in part because it makes it unique because there are not many people that like have come from Cuba and are able to be in the position that I'm in. So just being able to like talk about it and being able to like, you know, share my experience, I think in a way like makes me very happy with my life. Yeah. And in a way that you represent like these 11 million people that are suffering like on the island, that essentially one day you can make a difference.
I think for me, it's being Cuban has given me so many different communities, like not just like my Cuban community, but like the Latino community, or even just like understanding other countries' need for like human rights. Like, you know, I feel like it's almost made me a more understanding person, just my family's background and history. Of course, I have to mention the food and the music and the warmth. I miss that a lot being up here, you know. Everyone's like, you're like, mija, you're, you know, like, whatever. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions? I know it's getting really late. That's another thing about Cubans, we talk a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one question. So particularly as you know, like when it comes to like immigration stories, when it comes to first, second generation, third generation, the narrative always gets lost. So for you, how do you, if you do have kids or like, you know, cousins or whatever, how do you plan on trying to maintain those same values within the next generation?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. No. I think something that I've seen lost with myself is I don't speak as well, like as good Spanish or English. So that's something I definitely want to pass on. I think it carries so much of our culture. And then just the little traditions, like we have Noche Buena, which is like the night before. It's Christmas Eve. Yeah, not the night, Christmas Eve. Which like, that's my favorite thing ever. Or even just, I don't know. There's something, I feel like Cuban food is like a spiritual experience. But there's so much more to culture than just like, you know, food and music, like just the values that I've been taught and that my dad and my mother have been taught. I think that's what I'd like to carry on the most.
I think definitely like if we keep it up the way that, you know, we have right now, like talking, you know, about it with a group of people, I think we'll be able to at least like, you know, relay some information, or at least like the most important ones, which are the ones that we're going to continue talking again and again about. So, and then, you know, of course, like something that I'm planning on doing like at least one day when I have time, is, you know, of course, just like start writing like a book or something of like my family's experience. And I also, my grandma did a really good job of like relaying a lot of information, which is a lot of details, which I'm terrified of like losing my like memory and not being able to like pass them on. And hopefully with that, like I'll be able to, you know, like tell my great grandkids like the same story that I'm telling you now.
In my case, basically the same thing that David said about just discussing
Right.
as often as I can to whoever's willing to listen, like promoting awareness basically. But then to maintain that history down the generations, I also have been thinking that I would want to write a book one day, particularly about like my dad's experiences and my dad's kind of and life in general. Both my mom and my dad, but my dad because of like other reasons basically. That like my dad did a lot for trying to find liberty in Cuba. And well, he wasn't very successful, as you can see. But there have been many people who have dedicated their whole lives and sacrificed everything and have died trying to find liberty for Cuba. And because of the necessary secrecy of a lot of those things, there's no history or documentation for it. And I think that that's also something important to carry on. But then, of course, it's very difficult to like put those things in paper.
So I agree with everything that you guys said, including the book. You know, I'm giving some thought into that as well. And one thing that I will stress, the first, like for sure, is my kids, they have to know Spanish. That is a given, like Spanish,
Right.
English. And so, and it's actually like better, like the more languages you know, bilingual, trilingual, whatever, it's better for you in terms of society and in terms of mental state. But, so yeah, I do agree with, you know, everything that you guys said. Like I myself, I was born in Cuba, I was raised here, and I have that, I still have that connection with the, you know, country. It's very, at least for me, like it's a really special place. Again, the government's messed up, but it has a very unique history in a way. So,
It's
and
like a
that's why.
nostalgic feeling.
Yeah, so,
always
and
is.
that's why, like, even, I'm doing research on it now, so I'm studying Cuban nationalism in response to the Cuban involvement in the Angolan Civil War. So, like,
Wow.
that's, yeah. So, yeah, and I have, like, that, so it's just that nostalgic feeling, especially when I'm reading about it and reading about the political history and all that, and I feel like I want to pass that on to my kids as well, and so, yeah, I really love this talk, and how you guys said we're giving these discussions, and we're always going to be talking about this. I can never shut up, I know. But I want to recommend one thing, though, and it's a little off topic. Have you guys heard of it, El Oriental de Cuba? It's in Jamaica Plain. It's so good.
I heard they rip you off.
They do? I go like every time. I get up on me all the time. So
We're used to it.
So I go there. They also have Havana restaurant and Miami restaurant.
Yeah.
But
We went to one in Washington. Yeah.
So if you're craving Cuban food, go there.
The one we went to in Waltham was, the one we went to in Waltham, Cuban entrepreneurship. They made Cuban food into like this kind of like luxurious thing. Like you order chicharrón and it costs like $7, and they got you like 3 pieces of chicharrón, little plate, like dressed super nice, and they look super fancy, and it was just like, come on.
And it was and even like, sorry, this might be a little bit off topic, but even that experience was actually very interesting because we actually went with an MIT alumni who who was an international student from Cuba in the fall of 1958.
Wow.
Yeah, and the revolution happened like January 1st, 1959, and what he told us is like his parents just called him, and his story is like very, very interesting. Like he worked in a sugar mill with his dad, like doing like electrical work, and he got like he was incredibly intelligent. He like got his bachelor's at like 16 and stuff from like the University of Havana, and well anyway he ended up coming to MIT to continue pursuing electrical engineering, and his parents called him like early on, like February or so, like 1959, and he just told him like, hey, never come back, stay over there. And like he stayed in the area. He never moved back to Cuba. He's never been. Like of course he helped like take his family out, but he was never able to see like the face of the
Okay, so I want to take the time to say thank you to our panelists for coming and taking time out of their very busy week. And I want to thank the audience for supporting our event. And another round of applause.
Thank you guys so much for coming. If you want to receive our emails, if you could just write your email here. Oh,